Hey folks, this is now part 10 of my 10-part series on Bible chronology. If you have not yet checked out parts 1 through 9, go on my channel and do so now. Thanks! So in the last video, we covered the time period of the Babylonian captivity from 490 BC down to 421 BC, at least according to the fourth deportation. And in this video, we're going to cover the final time period from 421 BC up to the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, which will make the current year of 2025 5,992 years since creation. Now, as you'll recall in the last video, reconstruction on the temple began in the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia, as we can see here, for example, in Ezra chapter 4, verse 24, which on my chronology is 421 BC. We also saw that the events of Daniel chapter 9 were taking place in the first year of Darius, making that 422 BC. And this time period of Bible chronology is probably one of the most confused and misunderstood sections of the entire chronology of the Bible. And the confusion mainly stems from questions about who are these various kings, Cyrus and Darius and Nebuchadnezzar and so forth, and what are the years of their reigns, things that I believe secular history has gotten wrong. And that's why, for example, secular history has failed to identify figures such as this, a figure named Darius the Mede, who is identified in the book of Daniel, but because secular history places the Neo-Babylonian period further back in time, they have been thus far unsuccessful in figuring out who this figure is. And the reason why is simple. To borrow a quote from Raiders of the Lost Ark, they're digging in the wrong place.
You said their headpiece only had markings on one side. You absolutely sure?
Balak's staff is too long. They're digging in the wrong place.
The figure of Darius the Mede first shows up in Daniel chapter 5, the chapter with the famous passage about the handwriting on the wall that appears to King Belshazzar. And at the end of that, Belshazzar is slain, and in verse 31 it says that Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. And herein lies the problem. History records 3 kings who held the name Darius, who were rulers of the Persian Empire. Darius the First, Darius the Second, and Darius the Third. But our passage from Daniel chapter 5 with the handwriting on the wall refers to this Darius that takes the kingdom as a Median, not a Persian, which is why he's referred to as Darius the Mede. Now, under the Medo-Persian Empire, as it's sometimes called, the Medes were in charge first, and then the Persians rose up and took control of the empire for the latter half under Cyrus the Great. But none of the Median rulers that we know of ever took the name Darius. It's only when the Persians take control of the empire that we see the name Darius being used by any of the kings. So who then is this Darius the Mede? Which then presents the problem. But the problem gets even more complicated when we look at other verses that pertain to Darius the Mede. In Daniel chapter 9 verse 1, we see that Darius is a son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Medes, which was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. Now, the name Ahasuerus is thought to be etymologically derived from a Hebrew form of the Old Persian word for the name Xerxes. And so, therefore, some modern translations of the Bible have chosen to translate this word, Ahasuerus, as Xerxes in their translations. However, some texts have used either Xerxes or Artaxerxes at times, such as, for example, the Septuagint, which renders it as Artaxerxes in the Book of Esther. And still other works, like the apocryphal Book of Tobit or Josephus or others, have identified it with the name Caesares or Astyages or Cambyses or Bardiya, but the most common understanding is that it is a reference to either Xerxes or possibly Artaxerxes. So therefore, if this Darius the Mede is, as the Bible says, a son of Ahasuerus, and Ahasuerus is either Xerxes or Artaxerxes most likely, that will make Darius the son of a Persian, not a Mede, because both Xerxes and Artaxerxes were Persians. But the problem gets worse because, additionally, in Daniel chapter 10, we see that Daniel is speaking to an angel in the 3rd year of Cyrus. But then, as the conversation continues in Daniel chapter 11, the angel states the following: I, in the 1st year of Darius the Mede, even I, stood to confirm and strengthen him. So the angel is speaking in the third year of Cyrus about Darius. So either Darius is contemporary with Cyrus in his third year or predates the third year of Cyrus. Either way, that creates a problem, because the first Darius, according to secular history, doesn't come until after the reign of Cyrus the Great, and Xerxes and Artaxerxes don't come until after the reign of Darius the Great. So how then can Darius be a son of either Xerxes or Artaxerxes, while at the same time preceding or being a contemporary of Cyrus in his third year, in addition to being a Mede and not a Persian? So all of this now should make clear why this Darius the Mede is such a controversial figure. Who is he? And I think that the inability to solve this riddle has all ultimately stemmed from a misplacement of the time period of the Neo-Babylonian Empire in secular history. My personal opinion is they're off by about a century, but let's get into that. According to the traditional view, Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in 539 BC, bringing an end to the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and he did so by defeating Babylon's last king, Nabonidus, and possibly his son, Belshazzar, who may have been a co-regent with him at the time. And the Bible would seem to confirm this in a few places, such as 2 Chronicles chapter 36, verses 22 to 23, where it states that in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom. And then it goes on to describe that proclamation by Cyrus, where he calls for a rebuilding of the temple, and therefore setting the Jews free from their captivity to go home to rebuild it. But as you recall in Daniel chapter 5, it was Darius the Mede, not Cyrus, who took the kingdom of Babylon from Belshazzar, not Nabonidus. So who took Babylon? Was it Cyrus or this Darius the Mede figure? Well, actually, it's both. History records the famous conquest of Babylon by Cyrus in artifacts such as the Cyrus Cylinder or the Nabonidus Chronicle, or the writings of Herodotus or others, but Herodotus also records a second conquest of Babylon by a later king, Darius. And we have evidence of this from other writings in history as well, including from Darius himself in an engraving called the Behistun inscription. So, although Babylon may have been brought to subjugation and vassalage under Cyrus, it's really Darius that brought it to a complete end. And that's what we see described in the handwriting on the wall story in Daniel chapter 5. God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. Thou art weighed in the balances and art found wanting. Thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. So when then is this final conquest by Darius taking place? Well, we have some clues. First of all, as we mentioned, Darius is a son of Ahasuerus. And Ahasuerus, as we already went over, is most likely Xerxes or Artaxerxes. So of our three possible Dariuses who were rulers of the Persian Empire, only two of them come after an Artaxerxes or Xerxes, and that is Darius II and Darius III, so therefore that would appear to disqualify Darius I from our list of potentials. But there is a second, more important clue that we can look at as well. Turning back to our reference to Darius in Daniel chapter 11, we see that the angel speaking in verses 2 through 4 describes that there will be yet 3 more kings that will arise in Persia, but then a 4th king, which is richer than them all, will stand up, and he will go to war against the king of Greece. And that mighty king from Greece will take over everything, but then his kingdom ultimately will be divided into 4 parts. Now that Greek king whose empire was divided into 4 parts was famously Alexander the Great. So, if we go backwards from Alexander the Great, 4 kings, we get to Darius II, who is the Darius that is being spoken about in Daniel chapter 11, after which 3 more kings will rise, and then a 4th that's more rich than them all, who goes to war against Alexander the Great. That 4th king is Darius III, who loses the Medo-Persian Empire to the Greeks. Now, traditionally, that second conquest of Babylon is ascribed by secular history to Darius I, not Darius II. And they'll use things such as the Behistun inscription or the writings of Herodotus and other things to suggest that that's the case. However, I have disagreements, but I'll get into that later. For now, I want to continue focusing on the time period of Darius II for the purpose of examining some of the other clues that we find in Scripture. You'll recall from my last video that I calculated the 70 years of captivity in Babylon, starting from the 4th deportation to run from the first year in 490 BC to the 70th year in 421 BC. But in that video, I also explained how if we calculate from the 3rd deportation, with the destruction of the temple in 494 BC, then we go forward 70 years to the first year of Cyrus. That would bring us to 424 BC. And where do we see Darius II starting his reign? Right in the midst of this time period in 423 BC. So his reign lines up with the end of the Babylonian captivity on my chronology, which also connects perfectly with Daniel chapter 11, that there will be a total of 4 kings yet in Persia after Darius II before Alexander the Great. And there was. But if that's the case, as I have stated, then that would place the start of the Babylonian captivity in the 490s, specifically with the destruction of the temple in 494 BC, which is nearly a century after the traditional date for the destruction of the temple in 587 BC, according to secular history. Which means that the time period of the Neo-Babylonian Empire and the reign of kings such as Nebuchadnezzar would also be happening about a century later than is as traditionally held. But what about Darius being a Mede and not a Persian, and what about Cyrus conquering Babylon before Darius conquers it? Well, the reason why Darius may be referred to in the scriptures as Darius the Mede is to distinguish him from a Darius that is not a Mede, an earlier Darius, specifically Darius I, who is not a Mede. His matrilineal descent was by way of Persia, as was his patrilineal descent, which goes straight up the royal line to Achaemenes, the originator of the Persian dynasty. Therefore, Darius I has no claim to the throne of Media by way of ancestry. He's not of the seed of the Medes. Darius II, however, is another story. According to Ctesias, Darius was the illegitimate son of Artaxerxes and a Babylonian noblewoman named Cosmardadine. Darius II's original name was Ochus before he took the throne named Darius. But again, Darius II's mom was of Babylonian royal birth, which would make Darius a descendant of both Nebuchadnezzar and Nebuchadnezzar's wife Amytis, who was a Median princess. So therefore, Darius II could make a claim to both the Median and Babylonian thrones on his mom's side. And then on his father's side, his grandfather Xerxes I is the son of a woman named Atassa, who was a daughter of Cyrus, who may have been a descendant on his mom's side of a Median princess as well, giving him a claim to the Median throne on his father's side. But that claim about Cyrus being part Median has historically been debated. And also by way of Atassa, he would have claim to the throne of the king of Anshan as well through Cyrus. But Darius II's grandfather, Xerxes I, was the son of Darius I. And Darius I, as we already looked at, was 100% Persian, meaning that Darius II would have a claim to the Persian throne by way of his great-grandfather, Darius I, the son of Hystaspes. So now, having understood all of that, if we turn back to Daniel chapter 9, verse 1, the verse makes a lot more sense, because it exemplifies the 4 major thrones that make up the headship of the Persian Empire. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Medes, which was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. Darius II's original name was Ochus, but he took the throne name Darius to exemplify his connection and descendancy to the throne of Persia. Likewise, it states that he's the son of Ahasuerus, which is his connection to Cyrus, a claim to both the kingship of Anshan, as well as potentially a line to the Median throne. Additionally, it states that he's of the seed of the Medes, which he can claim that connection potentially on his father's side, but definitely on his mother's side, since his mother would have been a descendant of both Nebuchadnezzar and a princess of Media. And lastly, he's made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, which is Babylon, solidifying his kingship and heir to the Babylonian throne, again through his mom's side, who was a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar. And the first person who can make that claim in the Achaemenid line is Darius II, because Darius I can only make a claim to the Persian throne by ancestry. But Darius II can make a claim to all 4 of those thrones, which is why this reference in Daniel 9 verse 1 must be referring to Darius II. Now let's revisit that question about Cyrus conquering Babylon before Darius, as we already saw took place historically, but who was Cyrus and when did that happen? Now, traditionally, the date for the fall of Babylon is thought to have been 539 BC, and the Cyrus that conquered Babylon was Cyrus II, also known as Cyrus the Great. But if, as I have shown on my chronology, the temple wasn't even destroyed until 494 BC, then 539 BC is far too early to be setting the captives free. Now, we can confirm from historical artifacts such as the Nabonidus Chronicle that Cyrus did indeed take Babylon from King Nabonidus, and Nabonidus reigned all of 17 years, which on my chronology would place the conquest of Babylon by Cyrus in 447 BC. But that brings up two problems. Firstly, Cyrus wasn't reigning in 447 BC, Artaxerxes I was. And secondly, as I've already stated earlier in this video, I believe that the first year of Cyrus, the ending of the third deportation captivity, takes place in 424 BC, not 447. So how then can these two things be reconciled? Well, firstly, I would like to suggest that the name Cyrus can also be used as a recognizable title. Just as the name Caesar was once the name of one man, Julius Caesar, the name became so powerful that it was adopted and inherited by numerous people throughout history who became known as Caesar. And there is some historical evidence to show that Artaxerxes also at times went by the name Cyrus. In the writings of Josephus in the Antiquities of the Jews, he writes the following. After the death of Xerxes, the kingdom came to be transferred to his son, Cyrus, whom the Greeks called Artaxerxes. So there is some historical accounts of Artaxerxes going by the name Cyrus. Additionally, Artaxerxes was surnamed the Long-Handed because his right hand was longer than his left. And that's how he's depicted in architectural reliefs, accentuating this condition in his right hand. There was even a paper published in 2011 which suggested that his long hand might have been the result of an inherited disease, neurofibromatosis. In Isaiah chapter 45 verse 1, we have a prophecy about Cyrus that says, "Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates will not be shut." Now, Cyrus states that Marduk is the one who gave him this victory, Marduk being the name of a pagan deity that Mordecai was named after when he was enslaved by the Persians, and that Marduk searched everywhere, and he took a righteous king, his favorite, by the hand, and called out his name, Cyrus, king of Anshan. He pronounced his name to be king over all the world. And we learn from the writings of Herodotus that the way Cyrus was able to take the city of Babylon was by diverting and lowering the water of the river going into the city so that they could have access to the prior submerged gates along the side of the river. So the gates were left open for them by the Babylonians unawares because the Babylonians never expected the Persians to enter that way. So again, this was all prophesied centuries in advance by the prophet Isaiah. But if that's the case, and Artaxerxes is the Cyrus that is being referred to in this prophecy, and this takes place in 447 BC, again, why do I have 424 BC as the first year of Cyrus? Well, that's because I believe that even though Cyrus subjugated the Babylonians, he didn't actually put an end to their kingdom, he just made it a vassal state. And that it was later, around the time of Darius II, that the captives are finally let free. Now, there's a certain historical character by the name of Bardiya, or sometimes called Smerdis, that is instrumental around the time of the transition period from the end of the reign of Cyrus the Great to the reign of Darius I, at least how secular history views it. But because I believe that Darius I and some of the events that pertain to him actually are speaking about Darius II, I also place this particular figure to be a son of Artaxerxes rather than a son of Cyrus the Great. And I believe that he may be the Cyrus that then issues the decree to let the captives go free before he is slain after a short co-regency with his father Artaxerxes. This taking place in 424 BC. And that this then kicks off a tumultuous 2-year period in the Persian Empire where we have a back and forth between various people vying for the throne of Persia, such as Xerxes II, who himself dies early in this time period, Then he's followed by another figure named Sabdayanus, who I believe is impersonating that earlier Cyrus, who we know as Bardiya. And then also other regional figures attempt to usurp their regional thrones, such as a Nebuchadnezzar III and a Nebuchadnezzar IV in Babylon, and then other characters in Elam and in other places around the Persian Empire, all of which ends up being subjugated by Darius, including the conquest of Babylon by Darius that we spoke about earlier. Now, it only takes a few years from the time of the issuing of the decree at the end of the reign of Artaxerxes during the first year of the reign of Bardiya, who I hold to be Cyrus, that issues that decree for them to go home, until the reign of Darius, where he consolidates power and puts down all of these different rebellions. And so that is why, for example, it says in the third year of Cyrus in Daniel chapter 10, but also speaks about Darius being confirmed and strengthened in that same context. Because there's only a few short years between the first year of Cyrus, whom I hold to be as Bardiya, and the consolidation of the empire under Darius II. And so that is why, for example, in Ezra chapter 4, the adversaries of Judah, when they're trying to put a stop to the construction of the temple, write a letter to Artaxerxes in the reign of Ahasuerus, who I hold to be Xerxes II, and Artaxerxes is at the end of his reign here, at the time of his co-regency with his son Bardiya, who was recently slain. And so the actual stoppage of work on the temple is only for a couple years, from the reign of Cyrus and Artaxerxes until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And so that's why, for example, in the Apocrypha, in the King James, it states that the time period from King Cyrus to the reign of King Darius was a space of 2 years. Now, let's look again at the handwriting on the wall that is given in Daniel chapter 5, which writes 4 words, many, many tekel upharsin. And those 4 words correspond to units of measurement. Many is 50, it's a mina. Tekel is 1, equivalent to a shekel, and then upharsin is a half. So you have 50, 50, 1, and a half, a total of 101 and a half. And on my chronology, the Neo-Babylonian Empire lasts for exactly 101 and a half years, starting with the marriage between Nebuchadnezzar and his Median wife, which solidifies the alliance between those two nations, and that is not dissolved until Darius II conquers Babylon as the king of the Medes and the Persians. There are 50 years from the start of that alliance until Purim, and then 50 years from Purim until the start of the reign of Darius II, and then there's a 1-year reign of Artaxerxes III, which Darius has to put down, and then a half-year reign of Artaxerxes IV, which is also suppressed by Darius's armies, thus bringing an end to the Neo-Babylonian Empire and dividing it between the Medes and the Persians. So after all of that, how do we get from here to 70 AD and the destruction of the Second Temple? Well, if we turn to Daniel chapter 9, at the end of the chapter, we have a very famous prophecy called the 70 Weeks Prophecy, which is speaking about 70 sets of 7 years, not 7-day weeks. So a total of 490 years. And so if we start in 421 BC and go forward 490 years, that brings us to 69 AD. However, 69 AD on the Jewish calendar actually overlaps into 70 AD because the new year starts in the spring. So that brings us to 70 AD. Now the prophecy states that a prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And that's exactly what happened. The Romans came in under Vespasian and Titus and destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. Now this prophecy is being given in the first year of Darius. And the angel tells Daniel, who is praying, that at the beginning of his supplications, the commandment came forth. And he goes on to say in verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and rebuild Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks. Now, a lot of people think this is referring to Jesus. But the Hebrew doesn't really bear witness to that because it doesn't say the Messiah in the Hebrew. It just basically says an anointed prince. And there's a lot of anointed princes that we see in the Bible. Plus, none of the disciples in the New Testament ever used Daniel chapter 9 to try to point to Jesus, even though they're constantly going back to the Old Testament to prove Christianity. So I don't think that this particular prophecy is a reference to Jesus. And the other reason why is because the time frame doesn't work. It says from the going forth of the commandment, and we already saw the commandment came forth in the first year of Darius, to the anointed prince will be 7 sevens, or 7 sets of 7 years, or 49 years. That's well short of the time of Jesus. But then it goes on to state in the second half of that verse, and 62 weeks the street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. Well, who built the wall in troublous times that would stand for 434 years after this point? Well, that would be Nehemiah. And in my chronology, Nehemiah, who is an anointed prince by Artaxerxes, in this case Artaxerxes II, was sent to Jerusalem in the 20th year of Artaxerxes II's reign to rebuild the wall in troublous times. It takes him 12 years, and then he returns back to Artaxerxes to report before going back to Jerusalem again, arriving in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes II, which happens to be 49 years after the decree of Daniel chapter 9, or 7 sets of 7 weeks, followed by 434 years of the wall being built until the completion of the Second Temple, or rather the renovation of it that is started by King Herod and isn't completed until 63 AD, exactly 69 sets of 7 years after the decree of Daniel chapter 9. And that completed temple only stands for 7 years before it's destroyed by the Romans under Vespasian and Titus. Or as the last verse of Daniel chapter 9 states, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. That is to say 7 years. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. The war with the Romans started halfway through that 7-year period, partially triggered by them stopping offering of sacrifices on behalf of Caesar at the temple. And then the verse culminates with the destruction of the temple and the Temple Mount being left desolate. It was 40 years before the destruction of the temple, or 1 generation, that Jesus began his ministry. And then he was crucified in 33 AD, which was year 4000 since creation, meaning that year 6000 is approaching pretty soon, and the expected return of Christ also cannot be far off. Now, I'm not going to get into whether or not this 7-year tribulation commences before that, or how the eschatology that works in this video, nor am I going to set a date and say the day or the hour, because I don't believe in that. But I do believe we can know the time and the season, and that it is approaching soon, and the time to get right with God is now. And with that, I bring to a close my 10-part series on Bible chronology. I hope you enjoyed it, and more importantly, I hope I was able to impress upon you the fact that the Bible is true, and more importantly, that Jesus loves you and he's coming back real soon, and the time to get right with God is now, because the time is almost at hand.